Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining this virtual rally with unions, legislators, good government advocates, and grassroots activists. We have a number of legislators speaking, as well as others showing their support by joining the audience. I just want to take a moment and thank Assemblyman Harvey Epstein for joining us this morning, along with Assemblyman Richard Godfrey, also from New York City, Assemblyman Nick Perry from Brooklyn, Assemblywoman Marianne Butenchem from the Mohawk Valley, Assemblywoman Donna Lapardo from the Southern Tier, and Assemblyman Jeffrey Dinowitz from the Bronx. They are all joining us in our virtual crowd today. I think it's very important for us to realize just the nature of the crises that we are facing right now and the opportunity that we have to deal with these crises. And we're gathering here today because we feel very strongly, all of us, from the United University Professions that I, Fred Call, am honored to lead as president, to legislators and good government advocates, we believe together that it is imperative that the state legislature and the governor put in place the stock transfer tax without a rebate so as to help us dig out of the financial crisis that we are facing. You know, for many of us, perhaps the vast majority of us, Saturday was a very joyful day, starting around 11:15 or so. The weather matched my mood, certainly, as I literally was overwhelmed by a sense of relief that the 4-year-long attempt to destroy our democracy had failed, rejected by the vast majority of Americans. It might have been close in the racist, anachronistic electoral college, but in the popular vote, Joe Biden's victory is close to landslide proportions. When I saw the news, I suddenly felt that there was a chance for hope again. Hope that our nation would move together in facing this pandemic and taking the steps necessary to protect each other from COVID. Hope that our nation would take the lead again to overcome the climate crisis. Hope that our nation would take up the cause of racial justice and turn away from 500 years of oppression and genocide. Hope that our nation would move together in rebuilding from infrastructure to higher education, with funding to come from those who have grown unbelievably wealthy. As we know, they've grown more wealthy even during the depths of the COVID economic depression. And they've done so by exploiting the working class everywhere in the world. But hope was also there in my heart of hearts that healthcare, the finest healthcare, would be available to everyone, everywhere, so as to protect all of us from the pandemics that are the scourge of our nation and our world. And we need the best healthcare, not just in wealthy communities where it's always been available, but in poverty-stricken rural and urban areas. To a certain extent, that hope that I felt over the weekend has faded just a bit over the past couple of days, as I've heard so-called leaders of the Republican Party giving aid and comfort to Donald Trump and enabling his anti-democratic habits. These profiles in cowardice won't defend the Constitution they've sworn to defend, nor will they stand up for all of us in this country fearing the pandemic and fearing its destructive impact on our economy. I've seen this act before, and it sickens me. However, I will not surrender to it. I will not yield. The people have spoken, and they want our government to defend us and to help us. And if the so-called leaders in Washington, D.C. won't do it, and they are unlikely to do so prior to January 20th, then we in New York must take control of our own destiny. That is what this rally is about. We've waited for months for the Republicans to act to help all the states devastated by COVID. All we hear is crickets. Therefore, the challenge I make to the legislature of the state of New York is this: rise up. Don't take DC's no as the final answer, because it's not. We have the tools to raise the revenue needed to balance our state's budget, and more important than that, the resources needed to fully fund the healthcare needs, to fully fund the local government and education needs, and to fully fund the public higher education needs of this state. By eliminating the rebate of the stock transfer tax, New York will immediately begin to harvest a windfall of revenue that other financial capitals around the world already harvest. This will not cause any harm to the financial sector of this state or nation. Furthermore, it is just and right that New York do this. After all, it was done for nearly 80 years. Now is the time to tax those making billions off our labor and our resources. Now is the time to right the imbalance of wealth in our state. Now is the time for all to share the burdens of these difficult times. Now is the time for New York to show the way for the nation out of this depression, this long season of despair and cynicism. Now is the time for our state's leaders to give life to hope. To all our friends and those who would like to be our friends in the New York State Legislature, I say, come back to Albany now. Pass this tax. Make a stand for all of us. Then, as justice demands and the people demand, Governor Cuomo, sign this into law and make the way clear for us to heal economically. The time is right. The time is now. With this introduction, and hopefully we're all a little fired up to listen to those who lead this state and have taken the lead on bringing this legislation to the fore. I'm going to turn to our first speaker, and that is Assemblyman from Queens, Ron Kim. Assemblyman Kim has been deeply involved in public service his entire adult life. Serving on the Assembly Education and Health Committees, he knows the importance of the work of both UUP and NYSNA, the New York State Nurses Association. In his first 4 terms, he has distinguished himself as a strong progressive voice for a diverse district and is a leader on finding smart solutions to the challenges we face in every corner of New York. Please welcome to our virtual podium, Assemblyman Ron Kim.
Thank you. And thank you, Fred, for organizing this, and thank you, UUP, for putting this together. And my colleagues, starting with Assemblymember Phil Steck, who had sponsored this bill for, I believe, almost 7 years, since he and I both entered the Assembly back in 2013. So I thank him for his advocacy and his consistent push to make the case to make sure that stocks are being taxed the proper way, and stock transfers. This is a bigger fight, and it's about tax justice. It's about making sure that we deconcentrate wealth in the state of New York, which is the core condition that drive poverty, crime, and all the things that we're witnessing now, including food insecurity in the greatest and the wealthiest city in the country. Right now, when I walk outside, there's a line that extends about 7 to 8 blocks of working families, immigrants, waiting in a food pantry, waiting for mutual aid. And people are literally dying, homeless people on the street. There was someone who passed away a few days ago that somebody recorded on the streets. And it is so traumatizing and demoralizing to experience these moments, knowing that New York State has $1.7 trillion in its state GDP, the wealthiest state in the entire country, wealthier than Finland, wealthier than South Korea. But how do we get to this point where we rank last in terms of upward and social mobility? And the stock transfer tax is a great bill. We can extend it to include other financial transactions. And there's a whole group of other bills that we plan on pushing as soon as possible. We've had hearings, we've had town halls, we are organizing from the inside, from the outside to raise their urgency. And I, for one, will not vote for a bill next year that doesn't include not only this, but a minimum of $50 billion of revenue with tax bills. And I am willing to commit to that today with you all. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Assemblyman Kim. And I deeply appreciate your perspectives and your passion, and especially getting to the tragedy of homelessness. And this is something that is just it's a stark reminder to all of us how fortunate we are to have the voices and the resources to be heard. And I oftentimes think, and I honor your work because you are showing the way in speaking for those who cannot speak and who are struggling to survive. So thank you for being a part of this work, and I look forward to continuing to work with you on this effort and all of the efforts to make New York a fair and just society. It is my pleasure now to introduce to all of you the Statewide Membership Development Officer of United University Professions, UUP, and that is my colleague and friend, Tom Hoey. Tom is joining us today from his campus at the University at Albany. Tom has been a staunch and energetic organizer and advocate for labor for decades. And he has taken the lead in working with the New York State Nurses Association, especially in their struggle that is ongoing right here in Albany. And so with that, Tom, it's an honor to turn the virtual microphone over to you to introduce our next speaker. Go ahead, Tom.
Sorry, had a little bit of trouble unmuting. Over the past few years, I've been honored to stand with our fellow Neisner healthcare workers as they fight for their rights, wages, and respect at Albany Medical Center. This is where I've seen the strong leadership of our next speaker, Judy Sheridan Gonzalez. UUP also represents over 12,000 healthcare professionals, and our partnership could not have come at a more critical time than this. Judy?
Thank you so much. And my grateful thanks to the people who are putting forward this bill and the people who support it. It's something whose time has come. Again, this is not a new tax. It's really important to understand. This is simply to take away the ability to have a rebate. This is old news. This is not something new. This is not something radical. This is not something unusual. And we have to look, I think this past election has made us look at the moral fabric of our society. What has value to us? Somebody paying a tiny little amount on their yacht or the ability to transfer taxes that has nothing to do with their quality of life, or people starving. What kind of a nation do we have when people have to make those choices between whether they can have enough medication to take the medication to prevent a stroke, or to be able to feed their families, to be able to have a home, to have a choice so that they're not evicted because of a particular need for revenue. In the struggle, I'm in Albany right now with the nurses here trying to negotiate a contract. Because of revenue and because of the inability of the hospitals to be able to plan for the future, because of this lack of revenue, these nurses here are reusing their masks. Masks designed to be worn for an hour are being cleaned and reused. This puts people's lives in danger, not just the patients we take care of, but the staff that's taking care of these patients. The issues that are coming forward and these negotiations that are going on with these nurses for 2 years, struggling just to have their first contract, is all based on the fact that hospitals are now hoarding supplies, not delivering the things that we need to save our own lives as we save others, not being able to, nurses here in this hospital cannot afford health insurance. They can't afford hospital health insurance for their children. So they're getting subsidized health insurance because these hospitals are all crying poverty. The hospitals were suffering before COVID, or were using the excuse of revenue prior to COVID, but particularly in our areas that are hardest hit, in our communities of color and our poorer communities. The safety net hospitals, the public health system in New York City was facing an incredible deficit even before COVID. And now COVID is the excuse to say, we don't have the money. When we say, I need this to take care of my patients, I can only take care of 2 patients. I can only help this person ease their way into a peaceful death. No, you can't do that because I don't have the money for you to be able to do that. The choices we make in our society are choices that are literally about life and death. If we had the revenue that we needed to provide not only the care that people need when they get to the hospital, but also for the prevention, for the preventive care that people need to avoid being in the hospital. Not being able to finance services that are critical and essential for people, we end up paying more in the long run. When people don't get the health care that they need, they have strokes, they have heart attacks, they go into the ICU and cost more. People who don't have health insurance get very sick. Again, they go into the hospital, they go into the ICU, they cost more. So when we're talking about money, we're really being penny wise and pound foolish. This is a tax that is righteous. We need to be able, people should not have to choose between starvation, eviction, paying for electricity and heat in the winter months, cooling air in the summer months. All these things we call the social determinants of health. And what this tax will do, this tax will give people that edge, that support that they need to be able to get over that mound. Now, I know that we need federal funding as well, but no, it's limitless. There's not just one amount of funding that's needed. The deficit is so great in what people are needing that this tax will help bring people over that little bit of edge that they need, and it'll truly save lives. I can't emphasize enough how important this is, because we are seeing people literally suffering, dying, being infected, being cross-infected, not being able to take care of themselves because they just don't have the ability to do so. This tax will be significant in changing that social dynamic that brings us much closer to an egalitarian society, which is what America is supposed to be about. And thank you, all of you. Thank you so much for fighting for our most vulnerable New Yorkers who deserve the same things that everybody else needs. Thanks again.
Thanks very much, Judy. And thanks to your membership who serve our state, our people, so incredibly well and so generously. I think it is astounding to me that public hospitals, just that phrase, public hospitals have to struggle, when in fact, during the worst of the pandemic, it was public hospitals that were literally protecting all of us from COVID. And for them to face a situation where they are resource short, that is appalling and unacceptable in this or any nation. And so thank you for the work that you're doing. UUP will stand with you in your struggle at Albany Med, absolutely. And to get this tax, as you said, back in place without a rebate so that we can address all the needs of New Yorkers. Thanks so very much. I would like now to turn to the Assembly sponsor of this bill, the Assembly sponsor, Phil Steck, Assemblyman. Before Phil entered the New York State Assembly, and currently as well, Phil has worked as a civil rights and labor attorney. In fact, that's when I first met Phil Steck several years ago. It was as his role as a labor attorney. Well, since joining the Assembly in 2013, he has been a constant and effective fighter for unions, for progressive policies, and public sector investment in education and infrastructure. Phil proudly declares himself to be a Roosevelt Democrat, and we look forward to his voice in state government for years to come. Ladies and gentlemen, Phil Steck.
Well, thank you very much, Fred, and to your organization, UUP, for supporting this legislation. Also, thank you to Judy and Neisna for their support, for all the members joining in, to Blair Horner for his constant advocacy for this measure. I think my role is going to be a little different. Of course, there's a moral imperative to do this. But I want to talk about the good economic sense that this bill makes. So we convened a panel of experts, and among those experts who supported the stock transfer tax was the Nobel Prize winning economist, former chief economist of the World Bank, Joseph Stiglitz, who's now a professor at Columbia University. And the other panelists that we had, we dealt with all the arguments that you're going to hear against the tax, and none of them have the slightest bit of merit. To begin with, you will hear that they will move the computers that do these, that process these transactions to New Jersey. The computers already are in New Jersey, and they've been there for some time. New York State, in the city of New York, is not a suitable location for computer farms. But the basis of the stock transfer tax is not where the physical transaction is actually consummated. It's based on who arranges the transactions. And the Supreme Court of the United States, in a very well-known decision called Wayfair, because of internet sales, focused on the ability of a state to transact activity that is generated from within the state without being concerned as to ultimate location of the transaction. Another thing you will hear is that the people will start trading in other exchanges or other places. Guess again, every major exchange in the world has a stock transfer tax or financial transaction tax. And the European Union Parliament is in the process of adopting this measure on a European-wide basis. Now, one of the interesting things about New York is we have the highest volume of trading in the world. It's not even close. And for that reason, that is why the people trade in New York. You can get, it is more efficient to trade in New York, and the stock transfer tax doesn't change that one bit. Another thing that I need to explain about this tax is that it is a sales tax. And the principles of a sales tax are pretty simple. If you go to the store and the government puts a 33% tax on an item, you're not going to buy it. And as a result of that, the merchant gets injured. It's bad economics. But if the government puts a 1/4% tax on an item, such as the transfer of stock, that is not going to discourage anybody from doing anything, and the people who are processing these transactions are not going to be in any way adversely affected. So when we look at this, we have to make a determination as to whether there's any likelihood that any business would be lost to this tax. And the answer is absolutely not. When the tax was implemented in 1905 by the Republican Party, it didn't have any adverse effects during the entire 75 years that it was in effect. Its repeal was a mistake, which needs to be corrected. In order for people to move from New York to engage in this incredible high volume of trading, they would incur incredible cost in doing so. In comparison, the very small tax that the transfer tax imposes, 1/4% doesn't cost them anything in comparison to the high cost of moving. So this idea that people are going to move, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So again, as Professor Stiglitz pointed out, this tax is good for the economy. Believe it or not, folks, 80% of the trading on Wall Street now is algorithmic and not for investment purposes. People take advantage of very small movements of stock to make money based on their computer models. That's not what the stock exchange is for. The famous economist John Maynard Keynes warned about this being gambling instead of investment. And what the stock transfer tax does is it imposes a very tiny penalty on those who want to use the exchanges for the purpose of gambling rather than investment. And that is why so many economists like Joseph Stiglitz support the stock transfer tax. So my timer didn't kick in, but I suspect I'm probably at the end of my time. Obviously, I could talk about how important it is to save public sector jobs, how important it is to invest in the infrastructure of the state. This is a jobs creation bill. And if we don't have it, we're going to lose a lot of economic activity in the state.
Great. Thanks very much, Phil. And I appreciate the emphasis on the economic growth that this will generate. More jobs means more growth in the economy, and also, as we have been saying, a more just economy, a growing middle class. It is what is absolutely necessary. Now I would like to turn to one of the newer members of the New York State Senate, and that is Senator Alessandra Biaggi. She became a member of the New York State Senate in 2019, representing parts of the Bronx and Westchester County. And right from the start, the senator made her mark fighting for social and economic justice, gender equality, and workers' rights. She immediately hit the ground running and shows no signs of stopping. We look forward to building on our relationship with Senator Biaggi and continuing to work together. Senator, thank you for joining us. The podium is yours.
Thank you so much for those kind words, and everybody can rest assured that I am still willing, ready, and stronger to run through a brick wall. So, especially for the right things. So, thank you. Thank you to UUP for gathering us here today, and really for talking about this very timely issue, although I think many of us probably agree that fighting for equitable revenue raisers in New York has been a timely issue for a while now. Part of the reason why I wanted to have my voice be lent to this important conversation and to make a mark here is because I am a firm believer that if we are actually committed as a state to supporting all of our communities in their greatest moment of need, which is right now, we have to be willing, we must be willing to enact creative and common sense revenue raisers that leave nothing on the table. Before the pandemic, New York State was facing a multi-billion-dollar deficit, and since March, that deficit has more than doubled. Myself and many of my colleagues at the time were basically what felt like screaming at the top of our lungs about the importance of not passing a budget that did not have revenue raisers. And unfortunately, when the budget passed in April, there was no revenue that was included in the budget. According to the state tax department, from April to June of this year, of 2020, New York State collected $2.9 billion in stock transfer tax revenue, and yet none of that money actually made it into the hands of the state. It was instead rebated to investors at the height of the pandemic. The people who literally have made a profit during this pandemic, who many of us, I can't say that I can take credit for this term, but many of us call pandemic profiteers. That is literally what they have become. I think as many of the critical social services that are in many of our districts continue to suffer and our infrastructure is crumbling around us, New York really would be remiss and is missing an incredible opportunity if they continue to allow Wall Street to claim billions of dollars that could instead go towards supporting our most vulnerable communities through the crisis, the places where the communities have been underinvested in for years. Again, that is $2.9 billion, $2.9 billion that could have gone towards funding our schools, supporting NYCHA residents, fixing the MTA, repairing our roads, and clean water infrastructure. If we do not repeal the rebate and start collecting the revenue to fill our growing deficit, what New York City and New York State will experience is the continuation of having to make these drastic cuts to programs and services that many New Yorkers, mostly most of the New Yorkers that we represent depend on, working New Yorkers, while big corporations and people at the top continue to build their wealth, okay? A majority of New Yorkers support this idea of creating equitable revenue raisers. This is not something that I'm saying that is revolutionary. We know that the polling is in our favor. We know that a majority of New Yorkers support this idea. And so now what does that mean? It means it's up to us, the legislature, to carry out their will. We can absolutely no longer afford austerity and inaction that continues to put profits over people. In many ways, I'm sure that I'm joined by so many of my colleagues and advocates and others who are just frankly sick of saying that term of profits over people. This is what we have seen for decades, and there's literally no justification for it. And so I look forward to working with my colleagues to make sure that not only do we enact revenue raisers, but that we start to be thoughtful about how to build wealth and how to bridge that income inequality in a way that can actually not only take care of the moment that we're in, but then start to build towards the future of New Yorkers' lives. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much, Senator Biaggi, and we look forward to working with you on all of the issues facing our state predominantly, and I think we need to focus exclusively on those that address the vast gaps between the wealthy and the rest of us, and at heart, the economic, environmental, racial injustices that we are facing that are becoming so obvious, thanks in part to the COVID pandemic. They've always been there, but the bandage has been pulled away, and now we see clearly how desperate the situation is, and we have to address it. Thank you very much for your support and for your work. It is now my pleasure to introduce the Senate sponsor of the stock transfer tax, Senate Bill 6203A, and that is Senator James Sanders. Senator Sanders is a Marine Corps veteran, a champion for the working class residents of Southeast Queens. He's a product of public schools and public higher education. He has stood with our union partners in Unite Here in their fight for wage increases at JFK, and he is standing with us now in this fight for fair and just budget solutions to help New York State build back better. Senator Sanders. I think you need to be unmuted. Okay, well, hopefully we can take care of that technical issue. These things happen on in virtual rallies, but in the meantime, let's move on to a good friend of the work for social justice in New York State, and that is my friend Mike Kink. Certainly, he is one who understands how critically important the revenue campaign is for all New Yorkers. Michael Kink leads the Stronger Economy for All organization. It literally works on these issues day in and day out. We are proud to be a partner in this coalition. Michael's voice and leadership in this fight continuously pushes elected officials and the public to be aware of the vast disparities in wealth and how this state cannot continue to cater to millionaires and billionaires while we look at cuts to local government aid, to K-12 education, and the continual austerity budgets for public higher education. Michael Kink has been a strong advocate, a tireless advocate for the public sector, for economic justice, and for a tax system that makes sense, again, given the needs of our state and the great wealth within our state held by the very few. Thank you, Michael, for joining us today, and please take the virtual podium.
There we go.
There
Thanks, Fred. Thanks, Judy. Really good to be here with UUP and NISNA and some of my favorite elected officials and advocates. I just wanted to follow up on a couple of the points that have already been made about the economic benefit of this legislation, about the people who would be taxed and the people who would get the revenue, and about how it could make a dent in New York's worst in the nation inequality. We have the worst economic inequality in the country. We have the biggest division between the rich and the poor of any state in the United States. And at the same time, we are a big dynamic economy. As Mr. Kim said, $1.7 trillion in gross domestic product. Our economy is bigger than Canada. It's bigger than South Korea. It's bigger than Russia, right? Nations have taxes on their richest to deal with the needs of everyone. And that's what tax policy can do. It can address these kinds of inequalities, and particularly in this pandemic moment. As Senator Biaggi mentioned, the pandemic profiteers, right? I'm sure many of you in this rally have read the headlines about the billionaires getting richer and richer and richer, while we have 2 million people on unemployment assistance here in New York. We have 120 billionaires, and they have gained $77 billion in wealth since the beginning of this pandemic. Those 120 people have $600 billion in wealth. And they are the people that would pay this tax that Mr. Stack and Senator Sanders are sponsoring, right? If you look in the lists of the New York billionaires, you will see the hedge fund flash traders. You will see Dan Loeb. You will see Steven Schwartzman. You will see Leon Black. You will see the hedge fund and private equity billionaires that are making the most money from speculating on Wall Street. And if we take this simple step, I was almost crushed by the way Senator Biaggi talked about the revenue raise. So $2.6 billion in the hands of the billionaires, given to the people of New York State, right? Given to the college professors and the frontline nurses, right? Given to the people that are building homes for the homeless, given to public school teachers, given to the people that would fund environmental infrastructure and a clean, green economy going forward. And then take it back and give it to the billionaires, right? That's what we do. We take the money and then we give it back, this rebate. And that rebate was not done because the people of New York all collectively got together and said, we want to give all the money back to Wall Street. It was done by Wall Street. It was done when David Rockefeller, the chair of the Chase Manhattan Bank, took Governor Hugh Carey into a back room and said, you're giving us our money back, or we're not giving you any more loans for any of the government. It was a negotiated deal that was negotiated basically under gunpoint. And that is not good terms for negotiation. What we have here is an opportunity to go back and to take that money back for the people of New York. And when we do that, we will benefit the people of New York. As Fred mentioned, you know, we have been suffering from austerity budgeting. We have seen cuts to higher education. We have seen cuts to public health programs. We have seen cuts to hospitals and community health centers. And for years and years, we've been told that there's no money for anything, while the wealth and the power and the income of the super rich has grown. So I'm with Mr. Kim. I think a revenue package around $50 billion is probably the right size to allow both closing the revenue gap that we have and to allow the investments that allow us to build back with some equity to address the racial inequality, the economic inequality that New York has been suffering under. And so the stock transfer tax is the biggest chunk of what we need to move forward. We need a billionaire's tax. We need an ultramillionaire's tax. We need a pied-à-terre tax. We need across-the-board reforms to our tax systems. But the stock transfer tax, where the money is in the hands of the billionaires and then it's in the hands of the people and then it's given back to the billionaires, let's just snip that. Let's do it. We can comfortably do it. We're as big as Canada. And listen, they said the stock exchange was going to move away when the telephone was invented. Literally. Like everyone on Wall Street said, oh, we're not going to pay this tax. We have telephones now. And that did not happen, and it's not going to happen in the age of the internet. Right now, we can comfortably go forward with this tax, and we can raise billions of dollars that we need to help all New Yorkers. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Michael. And yeah, I think it is very difficult to wrap one's head around the idea that the state government of New York gives money back to Wall Street in the billions of dollars after it's collected. It is just appalling. I can't put it into words, but you have done it very well. Thanks very much. And I look forward to fighting alongside of you for this and for all that has to be done on the revenue side, and then the investment in working people in New York and in the good work that we all do together. That's what needs to be valued. Now, for those of you who are active in UUP and have been involved in some of our activities, both virtual and real, all around the fight for fiscal equity for schools or for voter engagement, our next speaker will be no stranger to you all. Senator Bob Jackson has been standing up to Albany, both before he was in Albany and now that he is in Albany, no matter who the governor has been for years. He's been in Albany since 2019, fighting for UUP and our members on the Higher Ed Committee. He traveled across New York to meet with UUP members on our campuses, and he has joined us many times virtually. There is no fight that Bob Jackson will avoid if it's a fight for justice and for fairness and for equity. And so it is a great pleasure and an honor to bring to you Senator Bob Jackson. Bob?
I'm applauding myself and you and all of us for being at this virtual rally. And normally at a rally, you want to make some noise. You want to applaud each other because it's about us refocusing about what we're doing and how we're doing it in order to reach the goals and objectives that we need to reach. So let me thank all of you for putting this together, and especially the co-hosts, Neisner and UUP, in order to refocus about helping all New Yorkers, whether or not in the cities or in the suburbs or in the rural areas, to get what they need to survive during this pandemic, and also to make sure that the people that are taking care of us in the hospitals are not laid off and not abused and, not paid the overtime that they're entitled to. It's crazy. And I think that that's loud and clear. And let me just say this, and I have to talk about it, is that, when I was campaigning for re-election, which was a no-brainer, let me just say that, from a general election point of view, I said that we need to focus on three things. One, Biden-Harris getting elected, because I could not even imagine us being another 4 years with Donald Trump as our president. Seriously. So that's number one. And then number two, I saw a lot of people were advocating for the election for members of Congress. And I'm saying, wait a minute. The most important thing, since we have already a Democratic majority in the Congress, meaning the House of Representatives, is the U.S. Senate, because the U.S. Senate is the one that has been blocking the House's $3 trillion package and won't even agree on $2 trillion. I mean, come on. So that was the second most important thing for me. And then the third most important thing, not even members of Congress, meaning House of Representatives, but the New York State Senate, because we know we have a majority of 40, but we don't have enough, if necessary, to override a governor's veto. And so let's talk, that's hard reality of politics, okay? And so now, in order to reach possibly that second goal of having a Democratic, a U.S. Senate, there's 2 elections down in Georgia that all of us better be involved with, or if not, Mitch McConnell is still going to be the majority leader that is going to whittle down a package that talks about the needs of the people, not only of New York State, but our entire country. I needed to say that because that's so important as far as staying focused. But as far as, all of the packages of taxing and increasing the taxes on billionaires and millionaires and what have you, I'm all in favor of. Let's get it done. I'm not here to talk. I'm here to try to do action. Right now, Joanna Garcia, my chief of staff, she's in the car with me, and we are here up in Inwood on 204th Street and 10th Avenue. We are partnered with Ryan Healthcare, and we're giving flu shots to everyone that shows up between 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. We was up in Marble Hill, and we're going to be down in other areas with Ryan Healthcare, because as you know, with this pandemic increasing and then flu, oh my gosh, we're in trouble. And we all know that what it takes in order to move out of this. And I'm glad that supposedly the trials of Pfizer is at 90%. And if that means that we're going to have a vaccine, that's very good. But we know that if we don't get a handle on this, and that's why the President-elect Biden put together this, the working group to deal with the virus, the economy is not going to get better. And when the economy is not getting better, that means people are not going to be reemployed. And so all of it is connected. And I say to you, as one of 63 state senators in New York State, and hopefully, God willing, more than 40 that we have now, but get up to 40, not 42, but 43, 44, and 45. So we have enough to send a message loud and clear, not only to the governor, but to everyone else, that yes, we have enough if in fact we agree that we're going to tax billionaires and millionaires, and we're going to do a stock transfer tax, that we have enough to override a governor's veto. And we hope that the governor would not even consider vetoing it, because he realizes the economic situation in New York State. We have not come up with the April or June, and now we're coming up on December, and everyone's hoping and praying that Biden and Harris will do the right thing immediately. But I'm hoping that Donald Trump will say, no, we need to move this stimulus package and get it $2.5 trillion instead of $2 trillion. And so those are the things that we need to keep pushing for. And I say to you, I'm willing to push. I'm willing to walk to Albany. But you and I know, and you have Dr. Brenda Robertson here, who is the head, I think, of the Black Nurses Association. We all better unite in order to move the agenda for all of us, not only Black and brown people, not only people that are middle class, but those that are suffering. And people ask me, what are the top priorities that you're focusing on? Dealing with the food insecurity. Everyone has to eat, and everyone has to have shelter over their head, and everyone has to have health care. Without those, we're in trouble. And obviously, then once those immediate things are taken care of, you talk about education and all environment and all of that. But if people don't have food to eat, that's what they're talking about first. So Fred and all of you, thank you for bringing us together. And Judy, we have to take care of our nurses, because you're on the front line along with not only the nurses, but the doctors and all of the people that clean up behind everybody else. They are just as vulnerable as everyone else. And we all need to work together to take care of each other. And I'm willing to do that. I'm really ready to go. I tell people, they say, when are you going back to Albany? January? I said, I'm ready to go back tomorrow. And under the current system that we're in right now, the leaders can call us back at any moment. And that's a good thing. So prior to that, many of you know, you needed the governor to call us back. Now we don't need the governor to go back. We can call ourselves back. I'm looking to work. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks very much, Bob. And I really appreciate the close there, that you're ready to go back today, tomorrow, whenever it's necessary. That's what we need. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And I think we have your colleague now on the line. I think we've solved our technical issue. Senator Sanders, please go ahead. Hopefully your microphone is hot and you can go ahead.
I trust you can hear me now.
Yes, loud and clear.
I'm getting big feedback. I trust you can hear me now.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
It's better?
Yes, it's very good.
sometimes I think that the enemies of struggle, of justice, sometimes get on these lines and make sure that we can't hear one another. Pardon me for being a little paranoid. It's probably not true. I'm glad to be on this side of the barricade with our sisters and brothers in labor, our sisters and brothers who are determined to see a good day, a better day for all of us. This is very much a no-brainer, and let me give you a couple of reasons why. There's a beauty in going last. You get to hear what everyone else said, and you know, you can cherry pick ideas, or you can try to put a human face on all of this, and that's what I'm going to try to do. Just yesterday, my safety net hospital told me that the governor's office is calling them, saying that they want the hospitals to prepare a 20% cut. 20% cut. Just as a contingency, they're told, but a 20% cut. Now, you and I both know that in this business, there are a few contingencies. There's just reality and heaped on reality. So a 20% cut would result in massive layoffs. And my safety net hospital just happens to be in the Rockaways, the area that had the second highest amount of dying from COVID-19 in the first wave. So at a time when COVID-19 is raging, we're talking about at least a 20% cut, and that's just the first. So draconian measures are being prepared and laid out. It's not just my hospital, it's hospitals all over. It's not just hospitals, it's going to be schools, it's going to be all of the social safety net, as tattered as it is currently, will be rendered further by this economic attack. Now, we don't have to live in that world, my friends. There's a better world within hand. We can ask our millionaire and billionaire brothers and sisters to share in the pain. They are good patriotic New Yorkers, good patriotic Americans. I'm sure that they would not mind spending a penny or up to a nickel more to ensure that people stay employed, to ensure that the infrastructure of our great state does not go down the drain. I refuse to believe that these people are so unpatriotic that an extra nickel would have them leave to greener pastures. And as Assemblyman Steck said, there are no greener pastures, but to go somewhere. I just refuse to believe that people are that cold-hearted, that small, that horrible, that stereotypical that some people say of Wall Street. I believe that they don't mind standing forward. I believe, as all of us believe, that the people that we called just yesterday essential workers should not be sacrificial workers today. Just yesterday, everybody was saying that the nurses, the doctors, the health aides, the teachers, the folk who delivered the food, etc., was so useful. We were banging out pots and wearing ribbons and high five and doing all kinds of stuff. And yet tomorrow we're going to throw them into the streets. I refuse to believe that that's the New York that we all want. And therefore, this is the right thing to do at the right time. This bill, among these other bills, mind you, but this bill in particular would raise up to $16 billion, and that's a conservative estimate. My friends, the budget hole of New York State is $15 billion. This could raise $16. We don't have to have that horror show that's being thrust upon us. A better world is possible. Are we going to sacrifice our friends and daughters, our sons and neighbors, ourselves to some altar of so Wall Street can buy their 12th villa in La Casa del Sol? Are we so jaded in this great state that we don't mind people, the homeless, racking up outside of our doors more and more, when there's something that we can do about it, which won't be felt by 99% of the people of New York State? And the 1% that actually will be impacted probably won't even notice it. I don't believe that that's the world that we want to live in. And I think that a budget is a question of choices. When we call it a budget, it's not really, it's really our choices. And if we are saying that the middle class must put further on their shoulders the weight of the wealthy, and that the poor will be allowed to slip through what little safety net that we have, so that we can ensure that the rich grow richer and the pandemic billionaires become trillionaires, become, I don't know what comes after that. I think that there comes a point when New Yorkers need to stand together and say, enough of this madness. Everyone must shoulder their fair share. We're not carrying these guys anymore. And I conclude with the words of W.E.B. Du Bois as we call him here. And he said, before anyone has cake, we all should have bread. It's that clear to me. And I'm glad to be on this side of the barricade with the best people that money can't buy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Sanders. And I'm glad we got everything sorted out so that we could hear your words and your passion and your commitment to this important work that I look forward to working with you on. It is absolutely the right idea at the right time. And I welcome the opportunity to get these bills passed in both houses, signed by the governor, and then we can have a fairer and more just New York. Thank you very much for your leadership. In our work for our members in UUP and the students we represent, UUP is constantly seeking out allies and building coalitions and partnerships with groups and individuals across the political spectrum and across our great state. One such friend, and he is a friend, is Blair Horner. Blair's work at NYPIRG and his knowledge of state government and the budget process is unparalleled, and actually it's legendary. His work on behalf of taxpayers and good government make him an Albany institution. Blair, thank you very much for your partnership and for your years of service. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Blair Horner.
Thanks, Fred. That was very nice. Hopefully I can actually meet those standards that you just laid out. Thanks to the UUP and the New York State Nurses Association for pulling this important event together. And thanks to my colleagues and the elected officials who've joined the event today. Let's review the facts. New York faces a $60 billion shortfall over the next 4 years, and as much as $14 billion this year alone. Let me repeat, $14 billion this year, and as much as $60 billion over the next 4. In addition to the state's problems, local governments are hurting too. The City of New York, for example, is facing a $10 billion revenue loss over the next 2 years. The MTA is facing a $16 billion deficit through the year 2024. Dramatic drops in sales tax revenues are hurting local governments, which are also facing budget crunches. With such massive deficits in every corner of the state, even if a federal stimulus is approved, education and healthcare could still face cuts. And it's what has become crystal clear at this time of pressing needs. Albany cannot cut services by more than $60 billion. Revenues must be raised. But how? As the tide of red ink is mounted, the state's strategy has been largely to hope for the congressional bailout. As it waits, the Cuomo administration has withheld funding from government services, both those directly offered by the state and those contracted out to nonprofits. The argument is that these withholds are temporary, but could become permanent cuts if Washington fails to act. As a result of the withholds, nonprofits are laying off staff, and hundreds of millions of dollars have been cut from state support for public colleges and universities. Those withholds, for example, have resulted in the loss of jobs for thousands of adjunct professors. Now, none of this is news. The question is what should be done. As you've heard already, since 1905, New York State has been collecting a stock transfer tax, which acts as a sales tax on the buying and selling of equities. Since the early 1980s, that tax has been refunded to investors. So far this year, the first 6 months of this fiscal year, the state has raised $4.2 billion from the stock transfer tax. And as Michael Kink mentioned earlier, they gave it all back. At the same time as colleges are suffering cuts, at the same time that people are getting laid off, the state gave back to Wall Street nearly $4.5 billion in the first half of this fiscal year. If New York keeps the revenues from this tax, it would only noticeably impact Wall Street speculators, those who buy and sell stocks frequently every day. The vast majority of New Yorkers don't trade stocks frequently and thus would not even notice the tax. As you've heard before, experts have argued that the tax is so small that it would hardly have much of an impact on the industry at all, but it would raise billions of dollars for a state that's in desperate need of revenues. Protecting New York's essential workers should be an important policy goal. They've been disproportionately burdened by the health impacts of the pandemic. Yet cuts to public services disproportionately hit the same people who've been keeping society together, essential workers. Instead of placing the burden of New York State's budget woes on the backs of working New Yorkers, it's only reasonable to ask Wall Street to pay more. As Governor Cuomo and state lawmakers grapple with the state's widening budget gap, the stock transfer tax should be collected and put to use. That tax is already on the books and ready to be collected. A tax that asks for a contribution from those who benefit most in society and are affected least by the state's financial shortfalls and health threats. It's time to repeal the rebate and revive the stock transfer tax. Ultimately, Governor Cuomo and state lawmakers will face a serious choice: to cut services that benefit low and middle income families and essential workers, or make the wealthy pay more. Most New Yorkers know what should be done. It's up to the state's political leadership to act. Their decision will dramatically affect the quality of life for all New Yorkers. And the way they can do it, a big chunk of how to deal with that problem, is to keep the revenues from the stock transfer tax and not give it back to wealthy Wall Street investors. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Blair. We are fortunate to be joined today, as I said earlier, by our Membership Development Officer, Tom Hoey. And Tom has the distinct privilege of introducing to all of us Dr. Brenda Robinson. Tom, could you go ahead with that introduction, please?
I'm privileged to introduce our next speaker, who I have stood with at the many NISNA rallies for a contract at Albany Medical Center. Dr. Brenda Robinson, who is the president of the Black Nurses Coalition, a group dedicated to defeating disparities and promoting diversity in healthcare. Dr. Robinson.
Hello, are you able to hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, great. I want to thank you to UUP, thank you to NISNA, the elected officials, and all the other panelists. Thank you for having me. And thinking about this tax, I use the lens, the health equity and education diversity lens. This revenue stream can support higher education and efforts to eliminate health disparities and those social determinants of health that breed these disparities. So revenue streams created for education and healthcare field is imperative. As our world is increasingly diverse, we need more diversity in healthcare, more people of color, not just at the bedside, but in leadership positions. Funding to increase affordability of education for minorities, increase in African Americans and Latinos in medical and nursing schools is a high priority. And let's not forget the poor. SUNY, as well as other institutions of education, have a poor record of African American faculty, tenure, and disparity in enrollees. Revenue could support many efforts to aggressively increase diversity in faculty, such as one of the elements of UUP's New York 25 proposal, which specifically seeks to increase faculty diversity to at least 25%. And they have a great proposal on the table. As diversity has not changed in institutions of higher education, nor has any real improvements in healthcare diversity, where African Americans and Latinos are still disproportionately impacted. And again, let's not forget the poor. So we think about this revenue. This revenue would have a positive impact on healthcare by helping to provide affordable higher education, especially at SUNY, and increase diversity in health education and healthcare. I'm a proud graduate of SUNY Poly and also actually presently enrolled in a program right now. And diversity is still lacking. The funding that would be generated for public education alone is a high priority benefit of the stock transfer tax. Health disparities, which has been highlighted by COVID-19, which we all know is not new, can be positively impacted by this revenue directed at the educational level by increasing diversity in a purposeful manner and providing affordable education, especially at SUNY. The stock transfer tax can create revenue for great public institutions, and along with strong unions like NYSNA, UUP, strong elected officials, and grassroots advocacy like the Black Nurses Coalition, we can increase diversity and health equity across the board. We can do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Robinson. And I really look forward to speaking with you soon, how we can work together to promote the diversity campaign that we are waging both inside SUNY and then also in the medical education to bring the diversity that is absolutely necessary just at a time when we know there's going to be a healthcare provider shortage and all of the healthcare deserts that exist across New York State. And so I'm looking forward to working with you. I think that we have a chance, as long as we can get revenue, to build New York to be the diverse state within institutions and in the professions to reflect the population in our great state. So thanks very much for all the work that you're doing, and we stand with you. Our final speaker today really brings us back to where we need to start in all reality. Brad Hershenson was recently elected president of the SUNY Student Association. Brad is not new to the work of the SUNY SA. He has been actively involved with advocacy and student initiatives his entire academic career. We are at UUP, we are excited for his tenure as SA president, and we are looking forward to his professionalism and his expertise, joining with the work that we do so that we can partner faculty, professional staff, doctors, all that make up UUP, joining with students and communities to make SUNY stronger. Brad, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, President Kowal and UUP for putting this together today. The Student Assembly is proud to stand alongside unions, nurses, NYPIRG, advocacy organizations, and our elected official sponsors of this legislation. Assemblyman Steck, Senator Sanders, a product of public higher education, Assemblyman Ron Kim, another product of public higher education, Senator Biaggi, Senator Robert Jackson, a graduate of SUNY New Paltz, all here today to call for solutions to the need for investment in New York State. As we fight to preserve and enhance the affordability and accessibility of public higher education in New York, it is imperative that the leaders of our state pass and sign legislation that ameliorates the economic crisis our state is facing. SUNY campuses across the state are engines of economic opportunity, and revenue-generating policies such as the implementation of the stock transfer tax will help provide that critical support needed during this uncertain time. Support that will aid students in the midst of a pandemic. Support that will increase student services. Support at a time when students need more, not less investment. And with the implementation of this legislation, we can fully fund public higher education in this state. The return on investment for the state and SUNY is $8.17 for every dollar invested. I'll say that again. The return on investment in SUNY for the state is $8.17 for every public dollar invested in SUNY. And with that, the choice for New York is clear.
Thanks very much, Brad. We have come to the end of our program, but the beginning of our work, or I would say the continuation of our work. So what I would like you to do is to consider the example that has been set for us by the great, well, I was going to say the governor of the state of Georgia, Stacey Abrams, because, I mean, come on, we all know she won 2 years ago, but it was only because of voting irregularities. And if our friends in the White House and in the Republican Party want to look at voting irregularities, they all should have stayed down in Georgia a couple of years ago and found all the irregularities that went on that kept Stacey Abrams from becoming governor of Georgia. But she worked tirelessly on the effort to get voters out, especially in African-American communities. But more than that, to instill in all of us the necessity to do the hard work. It sometimes, I think, has become too easy for many of us, that we feel if we just send an email or if we just make a phone call, that's enough. But I think what's really required is for us to reach out within our communities. And I think now more than ever, to reach across those, I'm going to use the word, the walls that have been constructed, that keep us apart from those who are our natural allies. We are all, on this particular issue, we are all New Yorkers. We are all suffering, except for those very, very few, the pandemic profiteers. I love that, and I'm going to be using that all the time now. But for the rest of us, we are in this together. We need the state of New York to lead the way. The leadership will not come from Mitch McConnell. It will not come from those who have opposed all progressive advancements going back to the Great Depression. It will come from us. And let's remember that lesson of history, that when FDR got to the White House and brought in the New Dealers and all the great new ideas, almost all of those were tried first in the laboratory of New York. We can lead the way. I want to invite you to take part in our next campaign, which you can find on the website, uupinfo.org/resources, raise the revenue, etc. You can see it there on the screen. Our next step is a virtual postcard campaign, and it's about $7.50. Guess where we got that idea? And the whole idea is to get the ultra-rich to pay their fair share. We are going to be basically urging our leaders in the New York State Senate, in the New York State Assembly, they are friends, I know they are with us, and the governor, to force the billionaires and millionaires to pay their share. We are all in this together. They must step up. We would welcome them to our campaign. Volunteer to pay your fair share. You can make yourselves very strong advocates for justice. Please do so. But in the absence of that happening, it's up to all of us. Today we have joined together, and it's been inspiring and energizing. I want to thank all of our panelists, all of those who have joined by the hundreds. We had over 350 or so registered, and I know many have viewed us on Facebook, 4 different channels where it was showing. I thank you all, but now we need to do the next step, which is to continue to press, to speak to our legislators, to speak to our fellow community members, our colleagues in our unions. This is urgent. It's as real as it gets. It's as urgent as it gets. Real progress will only happen if we all stand up, and only if we all stand up, raise our voices together, and call out for a just, fair, humane, equitable New York. And the stock transfer tax is an important step to getting there. Let's all get to work. I thank all of you for being a part of this. I thank our panelists, the UUP staff who worked so very hard to make this happen. And to all of you, I wish you health and safety in this difficult time. And let's continue to do this good work together. Thanks very much.